Yeah.
Say a quick hi to the room and to the internet and we'll get started.
Yeah, please.
All right. Hello, room. Hello, internet. For people in the room, just FYI, the only sounds that go out onto the internet, which is you can wave at it if you want right there, are the sounds that go through the microphone. So you can ask any questions you want. The internet will not hear you. You could say your social security number. It's fine. Maybe don't do that, but only the mic sound goes onto the internet. But that being said, hello, internet friends. Welcome. And do I have anything to tell you all? Oh, do any of you like music at all? You're like, yeah, cool. We have 3 different music related events coming up this week. So Friday and Saturday and Sunday. Sunday is going to be really cool. It's a workshop, and then there's a break, and then there's a performance of Bengali folk music. And the guy who's leading the workshop leads this same workshop, a longer version, at Esalen. So, endorsed by Esalen. And you can come to both, or you can come to just the performance. I will be at the performance. I'm really looking forward to it. And then Friday night, we have our expanded listening series. So that is like a kind of like, it's every month it's a different artist, and it's like a lie on the floor and kind of like vibe to interesting sounds. And the person who's doing that this month will also be here for a longer thing on Saturday that's all about sound and color and like a sort of synesthesia type thing. So cool stuff coming up this weekend. So I want you to know about that. And then, of course, we have all the usual stuff this week. Philip K. Dick reading group on Tuesday, Chandra Easton, and Michael Taft on Thursday. All right. Good to see you all. Good to see you online. Take it away, Zachary.
Thank you. Well, let's you take a final slug of tea and then we can sit for a bit. So I'd say try and pay special attention to the sort of inside and outside of your upper body, right? So not surprisingly, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff inside your upper body, but what there is that's of significance to sitting is there's a bunch of muscles, right? And they pull in all sorts of different directions, but one of the sort of features of sitting practice in general and Zazen in particular is to try and arrange them so that they're pulling as little as possible, and they're in order to keep you upright, and they're kind of relaxed and balanced, right? So starting with your your hips. Oops, I better put myself in do not disturb mode here. Great. Starting with your hips, I would say just work with the roll in your hips. Like roll your right hip to the left, roll your left hip to the right, and just using the muscles in your hips. And try and find a spot in the middle where, and this really is true for any lower body posture, but trying to find a spot in the middle where your torso is essentially framed forward, and the stress on your hips is balanced out in some way so that they can feel relaxed, right? And similarly with your muscles in your lower abdomen and your lower back, right? So to move to tilt your pelvis forward and back until you find a spot where those muscles feel comfortable and balanced. And by that time, when you've done both of those things, your lower body is, and kind of the interface here between your lower body and your upper body is a sort of solid and comfortable place to sit, right? And then up above that comfortable place. Why? Up above that comfortable place, try to so often our upper back and our chest, the chest is a little bit collapsed, just because that in a lot of positions that feels relaxed. Interestingly, when you're sitting zazen, it doesn't actually feel all that good, right? And the head is weighing on the muscles of the upper back. So the way to make your zazen posture sustainable is to allow your chest to float up just a little bit. It's funny, as the chest lifts here, you can feel a corresponding relaxation up here in the muscles right above your shoulder blades, right? And you can feel that that your neck flattens out a little bit. I've said this before, but the sort of musculature and skin on the back of your neck and in between your shoulder blades sort of hangs in a relaxed way, and sort of settles toward your tailbone. And those two actions, the lifting of the chest and the settling of the back, frame the body from here down as kind of a big balanced chamber in which your breath can expand and contract freely, right? Without working too hard at it. So try that out. Try to breathe a nice deep breath in. And then put a little bit of tension down here, right underneath your navel, right in the middle of your body, and let the breath collapse out into that place. If you do that a few times, what you'll notice is that with a little bit of tension here, then what they call the hara, right? The that act of letting the breath collapse out into your hara brings any tension up here along with it and just collapses that tension as well. And the sort of correct posture realigns itself every time you breathe. The face falls into a vertical plane. The ears line up with the shoulders. The head, you can imagine it floating toward the ceiling. And open your eyes. Your gaze settle here, right in front, and let it be wide and spacious. can help, particularly initially when you sit down, to watch your breath, to try and maintain just a subtle emphasis on the out breath. Maybe a little intentional lengthening of the out breath, just a bit. Sometimes that can turn into a struggle, and if so, just let it go. And in the end, still, even if it's not a struggle, just let it go. Let your breath be what it is. Let it have its own rate and depth. When you're aware of it, be aware of it as completely as possible. When something else takes your attention, be with that. Notice the contents of your mind. Don't think about it too much. Just notice it. Just notice, acknowledge, and move on. Notice the way sensations arise into perception and present themselves along with a little bit of information, right? Particular sensation in my right thigh. Now the hum of the AC. Breath. And similarly with thinking, notice a thought suggests itself. Maybe there's a train of thought down at sort of the level of the semi-conscious that's running, even though you weren't aware of it up until now. Notice how much the experience of being a human is built out of that dynamic. Thoughts and perceptions suggest themselves. And lead to pattern matching, memory, perhaps suggestions of action or agency, perhaps a little bit of planning arises. And then if they're left to their own devices, they just fade away. Or the other possibility is they rise up and sort of create a mental event, right? That can last for a little while and takes your attention. All of this is under the almost the umbrella of your attention, which wanders from one thought or perception to the next often without effort at all, and certainly with only a subtle effort, even in the case where there's some effort. It's like a elaborate path in a highly curated garden. Look, here's a bridge. Here's a rock. Here's a memory. It's almost like it's the whole thing. Just that. The play of perception, sensation, perception, and thought. Once when John Cage was asked about meditation, he said something like, I've tried lots of different things, but here's what works for me. I just listen to one thing completely. Hmm. So that's the other way to meet this interdependent co-arising, this ultimate reality is just pick a data source, right? Maybe one sensory modality, maybe even a particular sensation. Again, the sound of the AC. If you pick embodied sensation, there's a whole lot to choose from. There's the sensations all over your skin. There's your muscles and joints. Hmm. Just pick something. And then attend to it as diligently and with as much curiosity and wide openness as you can imagine and manage. Like what you'll notice is that process we were talking about earlier doesn't stop, so other sensations arise. It's as though they're trying to grab your attention, and it's okay if they do, but always return to doing that one thing completely. And notice the cycles in your body and mind that produce that. Sort of vying for attention. Just to give yourself over to the arising of the world, of that sensation, of the whole realm of the senses. There doesn't need to be anything else. A new sound creates a new world. So I think we should stretch a bit. There's a set of stretches that people seem to do. Certainly, my teacher did them. Both when sitting down and starting to sit zazen, and also after. So start with your neck. So put your right arm up and place it on top of your head with your fingers just on the left side of your head, and then slowly and gently let your left shoulder sort of collapse and pull, not very hard. Pull your head towards your right shoulder a little bit. Feel that stretch, and then put your right hand under the other side of your head and lift your head up for you. Just make it easy for yourself. And then the same thing on the other side, your left arm up. Gently stretch your head to the left and let your right shoulder just collapse. You should be able to feel this all the way down in your wrist. That is your right wrist. And then push your head back up. Similarly, left and right. So just look straight out over your left shoulder so you can feel that the stretch across the back of the left side of your neck. Rest there for a second. To the middle, pause. And then back the other way, to the right. And back to the middle. Now, turn your upper body so that you're facing directly over your right knee, essentially. And with your back straight and relaxed, just bend towards your right knee. And you don't have to bend very far. Just bend and notice what happens. Keep your back flat. You'll notice maybe if you're sitting cross-legged, some pressure in your legs. Just be sensitive to that. Pause there for a moment. And then up. And similarly on the other side, turn towards your left knee. Straighten your back. Relax. And then bend towards your left knee. Again, only as far as is comfortable. Feel the stretch in your side. Feel the stretch in your hip. And then back up. All this time, of course, you should be breathing. And then one last thing. So put your arms behind your back, clasp your hands together, straighten your back, pull, sort of fix it so that your shoulder blades are rolled in a bit, and then lean forward. Keep your back straight, reach out with your head, And maybe lift your arms, lift your hands up so they're facing the ceiling. And back up. So, any questions about Buddhism in general, Zazen in general, this specific period of Zazen, anything in particular, any of the stuff I've suggested as mental exercises, anything and everything. I don't know, the price of there's a koan where somebody asks, what's the essential meaning of the Buddha Dharma, and the teacher says the price of rice in San Francisco, basically. So anything, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
This might not be exactly a Zazen question, but it
Yeah.
relates to meditation, so I think
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
probably related. What happens? You talked a little bit about perceptions might rise, like senses of sound door might arise,
Mhm.
even a sense of a world might arise.
Mhm.
So we're noticing how it arises, but then it also like might pass away. So even like my perception of a world will arise and then it'll pass away.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
So I noticed, like for me, I was doing like a lot of mental, I call it mentalization at some points. I
Mhm.
just felt like triggers were kind of dissolving. But there's some mentalization. I
Yeah.
didn't do labeling, which I normally do like as a noting technique,
Right.
labeling and mental talk. I just saw that it was kind of having interaction.
Right.
I noticed it was kind of like it was doing this threat construction. Like our worldview is kind of being tweaked a little bit as the triggers were
Mhm.
dissolving. It's like when the trigger was dissolving, it's like, oh, see, there's no threat.
Mhm.
The triggers were there, it's like, oh, there's a threat.
Mm. What was the nature of the threat? Can you talk about that, or what do you think?
It's a threat construction.
Yeah.
Like the idea
Okay.
that there's a self and an other.
Right.
That like in order for myself to exist or preserve itself, I have to like be in conflict with another.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, it's right. So that's pretty essential. I mean, you could argue that the baseline of your experience is just this thing that we were talking about, with the sensations arising, presenting themselves, going away, the perceptions arising and bringing forth mental constructions like, oh, I recognize that, or oh, this pattern perception calls for a pattern response, and so on and so forth, all of that, right? But it's true that what we do is out of that stuff, we build a sort of symbolicated model for the self and a symbolicated model for the world, right? And
yeah. So for me,
Yeah.
it's like different worldviews started like kind of rising as perceptions.
Yeah.
And then based on them, some would be like more clumped and dark, and
Yeah.
then some would be like more open.
Yeah.
It'd be like
Exactly.
a little bit of vibration. I just noticing.
Yeah.
It's literally like my worldviews they're not like as clear seeing as I would like, but
Yeah.
they're like some. I just kind of noticed they were like more like phenomena.
Yeah.
Even the
Exactly.
sense of a world.
Yeah.
Phenomenon. But there was, when the worldview arose more than the perceptions, it was kind of like a white conscious like object that arose.
Nice.
Nice. I just kind of perceive it as like a lot more energy than just like an individual.
Yeah.
Than just like seeing or hearing. Like it just felt like the whole sense of a world was like, okay, this is like everything that I know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's really good.
Even that's changing.
Yeah, I mean, so my experience is that attending to those kind of subtle variations. I mean, one of the things they teach us is that the notion that the self is persistent, self-consistent, maybe even a little heroic, and all those other things that we usually imagine it, is kind of an illusion, right?
Right. We
Yeah.
can take that even further, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying like the self is me, I, we can say like all my perceptions, all my beliefs, all my systems,
Right.
those are also like kind of co-arising, interdependent on one another.
Yeah,
So even
exactly.
the concepts like of like this is good, this is bad.
Yeah. No, that's totally right. And so,
even my perception of consciousness too
Yeah.
is actually dependently arising on other.
yeah, well, I mean, it's arising as it's sort of what I was sort of getting at with the exercise is that it's that sense of a consciousness is actually arising out of the sensory input that arises to perception, and the continuous allostatic output that we're doing in order to keep our body upright and balanced and not broken, stuff like that, right? Yeah.
I mean, there's more like after, like once the meditation's over, there's more like contemplation. That's like didn't feel like exactly like a big insight hits, but it's more like there's some like integration that happens.
Yeah.
When it takes place. I guess my question was like, if even worldviews arise and pass away, then like how do we define well, if the concept of a stable, consistent perception is causing some degree of suffering, or at least quite a bit in some cases, then how do we define a worldview that is consistent, stable, and that's, I guess, beneficial?
Yeah, I mean,
without projecting.
Yeah, I mean, so you probably know this, right? The way Buddhist philosophy traditionally dodges that particular bullet, and another bunch of other philosophical systems as well, is they have this notion of absolute reality, which is the interdependent co-arising of all being, right? Which is fundamentally ungraspable and unknowable, right? And then there's the provisional, right? And sometimes those are framed as two different truths, right? The risk is that you assume that the truth value of both of them is equal. It's incorrect, right? The truth value of our provisional truth is, again, just provisional, right? But it's tremendously practical and useful, right? It doesn't have to be true to be practical and useful, right?
When you said the two truths, were you talking about like the two truths doctrine, like emptiness?
Yeah, right. Or the relative and the absolute, and so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that's the usual way to kind of, for lack of a better word, rationalize that almost paradoxical or seemingly paradoxical question about how to live a useful, comfortable, skillful life in a world where you mostly rely on your cognition, speech, action, pattern responses, memory, and so on and so forth. How do you build a life that feels true, authentic, and skillful, using all that, which all of that stuff is the stuff that that essentially is the cause of suffering for us, right? And at the same time, it's all we've got to dig ourselves out of it, basically.
When you say
Right.
cause of suffering, like how do you know if something's causing suffering versus it just seems like it's appearing in the space? Because when I do like Michael Tapp's non-dual meditations, or
Mhm.
even like this one, it doesn't really feel like I'm causing suffering.
Yeah.
It just feels like suffering arises, and I have to like, I may have to engage with it sometimes.
Yeah.
Or if it is engaging, it's just let it do its thing.
Yeah.
I just kind of hold the awake space and let it do its.
Yeah. I think that's good. But I mean, but nonetheless, I mean, so, you know, the I would say, generally speaking, the mechanism whereby suffering arises, let's put it that way, is is that we have an expectation that something is going to be true, you know, that something is going to happen, that the world is going to be in a particular way, that you know, we'll have a certain level of comfort, or whatever. We have a set of expectations, and those expectations, for pretty obvious reasons, are always being thwarted one way or another, right? You know? And yeah, and that causes a kind of discomfort and dissatisfaction that is kind of pervasive, and if you're not careful with it, it can lead to unskillful actions, which are intended to make the world more like how we want it to be. Basically, that, you know, that's kind of the mechanism, right? The truth is, we kind of can't help ourselves but to do those things, right? And as you say, the way to freedom is not to abolish all that activity, right? Because we can't, because we're human, right? The way to freedom is to take a different relationship with it and hold it in a different frame, basically, right? Yeah. And that frame is the frame that we practice while we're sitting, basically, and other times as well, right? Does that make sense, or what do you think?
Well, I relate to what you're saying, but
Yeah.
the question, like I was always thinking recently, is like, am I causing my experience? Like, can I actually cause things to happen, or can I will them to happen? And it seems like upon investigation, 3 characteristics or even other models, that I can't.
Yeah.
So that makes it so that can be actually kind of freeing in a sort of way, because then it's like, okay, then like it's out of my
Yeah.
hands. Like I can try to have some role or influence in a very limited way, but it's really out of my hands. Like,
Yeah.
I can do something now, and then maybe 1,000 years from now, it won't. If it was negative, it'll get cleaned up by
Right.
something happens somewhere else. But if I do something positive, I'm like, well,
it could ruin everything, right?
Then it'll even be worse than something negative.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, the gift that comes along with that for humans is that we have this little tiny shred of agency and ability to recognize and slightly guide our response more than anything else, right? Yeah.
Or you can even do what I call you may not be trying to influence like a future response, but all your previous like program responses
Mhm.
kind of dissolve a little bit or get seen through.
Yeah.
And that makes it so the next response is going to be more. I wouldn't always say spontaneity is always good all the time, but
Yeah.
I would say being able to adapt to the situation as it arises is better
Yeah.
than being like stuck in like. Sometimes it's good to pre-program certain things.
Yeah.
Like my driving habits, like it's good. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
If I lose a little awareness, then if I have a sort of conditioned behavioral response that's skilled, then it's good. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's like you're just stuck in a pattern, and then you can't.
Yeah. Exactly.
Even look at a way.
Yeah. So the request of practice is to bring yourself close to as close as you can to the sort of energy and information that's arising in the moment, and to respond as directly as humanly possible to that. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Nice. Lovely. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Can you correct me about something?
Mm.
So I've been kind of thinking about an oversimplified model of the 3 like turnings of the Dharma wheel,
Mm.
and looking at Theravada as renunciate and kind of a deconstructive
Mhm.
practice. So you're like turning away from experience, get enlightened by yourself. So there's a deconstruction, and then I've been sort of thinking about like, okay, deconstruction, resourcing, and reconstruction. So
Mhm.
kind of like deconstruct, and then you collect a bunch of resources to yourself, like energy and heartfulness and stuff, and then you start doing like reconstructive practices, like kind of rebuilding.
Mhm.
And I'm doing a Katie thing where I take a system and then another system and try to map them all.
Smush them together, right? Yeah.
I love that. And so I've been trying to smush like Mahayana into the resourcing bin by sort of thinking about like Brahma Vihara practice, which as far as I know came along with Mahayana, and the kind of collectivist orientation, and thinking of Mahayana as a kind of like heart-based orientation. And I know for sure that I'm like vastly oversimplifying that. But one thing that I'm kind of stuck on is that like Theravada is so clearly renunciative. Like I practiced that way for a while and I know a little bit about it. And it really is just like, you want to be in Nirodha, which is like experience is not happening. And then in Vajrayana, that is so clearly kind of like leaning all the way back in, like taking the resistance as the path, and kind of like leaning into the world. And like you have all these householders who are practicing Tantra in like Hinduism and in Buddhism. So that distinction seems super clear to me. I feel like Theravada kind of renounce, turn away. Vajrayana like just go towards to like an absurd enough degree that it has the same effect in the direction. And the answer, it's totally fine if the answer is like your model makes no sense, stop using it. But I'm just wondering, like in that model where Theravada is like super renunciative and Vajrayana is super like leaning in, where the whole like Mahayana zone kind of falls on that.
Yeah, so I would say this about that. The function of maybe some people will say this is heretical, but I think the function of the Mahayana is to is first and foremost to highlight the absurdity of making a gaining effort in order to wake up, right? So that's the first part, right? And the second function of the Mahayana is to focus, particularly in China, is to focus the attention of the practitioner on their practice today and their conduct today in this moment, right? So no gaining idea, stay close to the formal and informal practice of your life in this moment, and including the precepts, but also including other monastic forms and so on and so forth. And so it's kind of, I hate to say this, but it's kind of a middle way, right? and I mean, that's, the seminal text of Mahayana Buddhism is that ridiculously unreadable thing by Nagarjuna, right? Which is actually called something like the merit of the middle way. But no, that's, it really is like that. It's like, again, like it pushes the timeline of awakening is defined by, and the fruition of awakening is defined by the Theravada Buddhists out to infinity, right? Right? Like, and so the notion that your pursuit of being awake is gonna bear any fruit, you can put that one to bed. You just keep practicing, right? And then because the primary influence, I think, on Mahayana Buddhism was Central Asian and Chinese, it's mostly focused on on your practice and conduct in this moment, basically, right? Anyway, so that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, so I mean, it's no surprise what I suspect what to any of you what I think about this stuff. I mean, basically, you probably know Lisa Feldman Barrett, right?
Sure, personally. Actually.
Yeah.
So
I mean, basically, she has this I think, like super Buddhist idea, the way I interpret it anyway, which is that the ground of your subjective experience is essentially sensation, perception, and mental formation, just like it says in the Abhidharma cooked up by the Sarvastivadins in the second millennium or second century BC or so, or something like that. It was, and her rationale for it is way more technical, but it totally aligns with the experience that we were just talking about, right? And so, when a monk asked Jiao once, famous Tang Dynasty Zen master, what is Jiao, right? Which is a kind of a standard question. The thing that's funny about it is that Jiao was just named he was just named after the town that he lived in, basically, right? So so when the monk said, "What is Jiao?" Jiao said, "Well, East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate," and the monk said, "Wait, I wasn't talking about that Jiao," because he thought he meant the town, and Jiao says, "No, which Jiao do you think you're talking about anyway?" Right? But what he's saying is that our experience of being sentient and imbued with at least a teensy bit of agency, just it is there's in Jiao, the town, there's only 4 gates, right? We have a few more, but nonetheless, it's the constant interdependent co-arising of the world being expressed through its contact with this body, this mind, and the machinations that arise thereafter, right? We're a direct expression of ultimate reality, even if we can't grasp it, right? And in fact, even if it's foolish to grasp it. But to live in appreciation of that is actually quite possible, right? And wonderful, right? And to tune our activity to stand as close as possible to it. There's a great quote in think it's the Xinjian Ming, that says turning away and touching are both wrong because it's like a massive fire, right? It's like the co-arising of everything is like a massive fire. In fact, quite literally, in some ways, it's just a whole lot of oxidation, right? But if you reach in and grab a hold, you get burned. If you turn away, you'll never be warm again, right? So just to stay close. You don't have to fiddle with it, and you don't have to cut it off, right? In fact, you can't, right? Just to stay close. And what happens naturally when you stay close to that is this kind of unconditioned appreciation of just the simple act and fact of being a live sentient being, arises seemingly out of nowhere, and is of inestimable help, basically. So East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate. Go ahead.
Can you talk about like the paradoxical nature of either Zen koans or some types of Zen contemplation? Because I'm getting a sense when I read Zen, at least some people claim they're Zen texts, some will not. But like when Shinryu Suzuki talks about Zen mind, beginner's mind, big mind, like even when he gives like the koan example of like not one, not two, he's like representing the posture. Even like if you're grasping too hard at the precepts, then you'll crush them. If you pull away from them, then you won't be able to understand their beauty, so you won't be able to relate to the world and have a good experience. But then he'll like kind of say things that sometimes seem contradictory. I'm not saying anything about him specifically, but from my understanding of how the Zen koans are with like the Zen masters talking, even when you see the representation in like movies and TV shows, which is probably not a perfect media representation, of course. How do you like kind of reconcile something that feels like a little bit paradoxical?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question. So, Mel Weitzman, the sort of sadly recently deceased sort of grand old man of Berkeley Zen, once gave a talk. A friend of mine was just telling me about it the other day, that said, if it's not a paradox, it's not the truth. And I almost completely agree with Mel Weitzman, but the whole thing of the body and mind are not one, not two. The proposition that you need to bring forth boundless way-seeking mind, and at the same time not sit with absolutely no gaining idea whatsoever, and all this. None of these things are actually paradoxical. They're only paradoxical from the point of view of the relative and the conditioned, right? From the point of view of experience and the kind of the interface between the relative and the absolute that we all live in every single day, right? All the time. They're not paradoxical at all. You can be overcharged with way-seeking mind and spiritual ambition at time t, and at time t plus some very small additional time, totally without any of that, right? The mind is capable of all of that, right? And the same thing with, the Zen world and the Buddhist world in general is constantly making up these dualities, right? Like big mind and conventional mind, and the one that this guy Dongshan came up with during the Tang Dynasty, which more or less applies to the same thing. He called them the the upright and the leaning, or the upright and the crooked, basically, the straight and the crooked, right? And they're simultaneously helpful from the point of view of conceptual thinking about practice and experience, right? And also empty and meaningless from the point of view of the absolute, right? And that's okay that that's true. It's, in the Heart Sutra, it says, Avalokiteshvara was sitting there and he realized he doesn't have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, no objects of mind. And then he goes on and he's like, oh, wait, there's no eightfold path. There's no suffering or release from suffering, all the rest of that sort of thing. And then he says, okay, and so here's how you deal with that. You rely on this thing that we were talking about earlier, where you rely on the term in the Mahayana world is prajnaparamita, wisdom beyond wisdom, right? Or transcendent wisdom. Yeah. You rely on exactly the intuition that arises from direct contact with the present moment, basically. Then you don't have to worry about whether you have a you have a nose or not, right? And what the Heart Sutra says is, and again, this is the Mahayana document, right? What the Heart Sutra says is, when you rely on this direct connection with and response, as skillful as possible response to the actual content of the present moment, the hindrances sort of dissolve, right? The sort of poisonous doubt and sloth and torpor and all that sort of thing, right? And without the hindrances, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? And so that's the message of the Heart Sutra, and kind of the message of Mahayana Buddhism, I think, generally, right? So does that help?
I think it gave some context and provided some things. I'm not so certain, though, that just because you drop the hindrances, that means that you'll be more skillful in your means of relating, but I don't know what comes after, because I have never 100% dropped my anger 100%.
Right, fair enough.
And to be honest, I've actually never met a person who's 100% dropped, but I imagine there are people who have gotten much better. Maybe it appears differently because of the way how, I've had experience where there was a time where I did have a lot of anger, and immediately the amount of energy that was counter, I don't know the term.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make up a term just because I can. Their anger is this force of nature, and then there's counter force of super primordial compassion
Mm-hmm.
that manifests exactly at the same rate.
Yeah.
And it just dissolved into pure energy.
Yeah.
Which still was moving through me and cycling.
Yeah. It's always going to be like that, right? And and to be fair, anger is a completely appropriate response to some situations, right? And the request is not to abolish it or struggle with it, or the request is to meet it in exactly the same way that we were talking about. Basically, do you ever are you familiar with Kuan Yin? The sort of the yeah, exactly right. Yeah. There's a statue of her on Putuoshan in China. It's one of the Buddhist mountains, and it's the Buddhist mountain it's an island actually that's dedicated to Avalokiteshvara, to Kuan Yin, right? And it's sort of in the mouth of, I think it's the Yangtze River. I'm not sure which, but maybe the Yellow River, but I think it's the Yangtze. In any case, it's out there, and there's this gigantic statue of Kuan Yin, and she's standing facing the mainland, and she's leaning towards the mainland like this. And it's amazing because it's a huge statue made out of metal, and they managed to make it look like she's leaning. I was always like, one of these days there's gonna be an earthquake, and she's gonna be like, nah. But it's beautiful. It's like that's the the kind of listening that makes anger an appropriate response to some situation, right? And also not a cause of suffering, right? Um, you are curious, compassionate, and as wide as the sky, basically, and it works. And and you can stand on your plinth on an island in in China and take it in. It's good. Mm. Well, it was really a pleasure. It was great sitting with you. So thanks a lot. And it's great to see you. It's been a while.
know.